The desert sun beat down on the dust-filled camp, where American and British forces had gathered, their uniforms coated with sand and fatigue. Soldiers moved like shadows, burdened by the weight of a long and brutal conflict. In the middle of the organized chaos stood a young woman named Claire Dawson. To most of the men around her, she was just another mechanic, her hair tucked under a cap, her hands stained with oil from fixing engines and patching bullet holes in armored vehicles. She blended into the background, an unremarkable figure in a world dominated by war-hardened veterans. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from, and if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. But Claire carried a secret few knew. She wasn't just a mechanic. Before enlisting, she had spent years studying aviation, quietly training whenever she could, logging unofficial hours in simulators. She dreamed of the sky, of the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, a plane feared for its massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon. Yet dreams were fragile things, often crushed under rules, expectations, and the scars of her past. Claire's father, a decorated pilot, had died in combat when she was only 12, his plane lost in a fiery descent. The memory haunted her, fueling her passion, but also planting a seed of fear that she could one day follow his fate. The general's voice cut through the thick desert air. His tone was low, grave, and final. "It's over. We can't hold this position." His words echoed in the command tent and then out across the camp. Soldiers froze, their morale collapsing. The enemy's tanks had breached the perimeter. Heavy artillery had silenced Allied positions. If the front failed, entire cities beyond would be lost. Panic spread like fire through dry grass. Some soldiers cursed under their breath, others clutched their rifles tighter. Even battle-hardened men who had studied legends like Norman Schwarzkopf and Chris Kyle, muttered that the end had come. Claire felt her stomach twist. She wasn't immune to the fear. She remembered her father's last words before he deployed, for the final time. Courage doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It means you go anyway. But fear whispered in her ear that she was just a mechanic, just another faceless figure in the war machine. Still, when the shouting and despair reached a fever pitch, Claire stepped forward. She wasn't loud. Her voice wasn't commanding, but it was steady. "I can fly the A-10, she said. Heads snapped toward her, disbelief etched into every face. A young woman, oil-stained, small compared to the towering soldiers, claiming she could fly the beast of a plane designed to chew through tanks. The general frowned. "That's not possible." Others laughed nervously, muttering that she was insane, that the A-10 wasn't for rookies, that she'd never even passed flight school. Claire swallowed her doubt. "It isn't arrogance," she said softly. "I know I can, and if I don't, then we lose everything." The air grew heavy with tension. The general hesitated, torn between protocol and desperation. Claire walked past him, toward the runway, each step deliberate. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't fearless. Her heart pounded so loud it filled her ears. But she knew what had to be done. The build-up began with agonizing slowness. Claire climbed into the cockpit of the A-10, her father's dog tags hanging from her neck. She flipped the switches with trembling hands, each metallic click sounding like a countdown to destiny. The engines rumbled awake, sending vibrations through the ground. Outside, soldiers gathered, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering prayers. The desert wind kicked up dust, swirling around the plane as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Every detail was magnified. The way her gloves gripped the throttle, the way the HUD flickered green, the sound of the Avenger cannon spinning up for a systems check. Her breathing slowed, every inhale and exhale stretching. Into eternity, she whispered to herself, "You've trained for this. Trust yourself." The impossible moment arrived. Claire taxied forward, the warthog lumbering like a beast unwilling to wake. Then, with a surge of power, she pulled back, and the plane lifted into the sky. Soldiers on the ground craned their necks, watching the unthinkable. A mechanic, a nobody, becoming their last hope. She saw the battlefield stretch below. Enemy tanks rolling forward, armored columns advancing, missiles primed to erase everything she loved. Claire tightened her grip and dove. Then she unleashed the Avenger cannon. The sky thundered as the A-10 roared, spitting fire and steel. Tanks erupted into flames, convoys shattered under her relentless assault. She swooped low, flying dangerously, close to the ground, dodging SAM fire that streaked past her wings. Each maneuver was death-defied, yet she pressed on, her fear replaced by precision. Silence hung for a heartbeat after her first strike. A fragile pause where victory or death balanced on the edge of a blade. Then came the outcome. The impossible had been achieved. Enemy forces were in chaos, their advance broken. The soldiers below erupted in cheers, disbelief painted across their dust-streaked faces. The general, watching from the command post, removed his cap in awe. "She just turned defeat into victory," he whispered. Relief spread like cool water across the camp. Soldiers who had been moments from retreat now surged forward with renewed determination, fighting alongside the thunderous cover fire of the A-10. For them, Claire was no longer a nameless mechanic. She was their guardian angel in the sky. But Claire, landing hours later with the A-10 battered and scarred, remained calm. She stepped down from the cockpit, sweat dripping, lungs burning, but her voice steady. When asked how she had done it, she simply said, "Someone had to." No pride, no boast, just truth. The story would travel far beyond the desert. Her courage became a whisper in military camps, a tale soldiers repeated under the stars. Not because she had saved them with firepower alone, but because she had reminded them that sometimes the difference between defeat and victory is a single act of belief in oneself. And the lesson lived on. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It is the quiet voice that says, "I will try," even when the world says it's over. Claire Dawson proved that day that ordinary can become extraordinary when the moment demands it. She showed that hidden strength, once revealed, can turn the tide of history. The general would never forget her, nor would the men she saved. And though Claire returned to the shadows, never seeking fame, her legacy lingered. The unknown pilot of the A-10 had become a symbol, not of war's destruction, but of humanity's unyielding will to rise when everything seems lost. Because, in the darkest hour, when defeat seemed certain, one woman dared to take flight. The night had fallen heavy over the desert. Stars were faint behind a haze of smoke and dust, and the distant rumble of artillery rolled like thunder across the horizon. Inside the U.S. Forward Operating Base, soldiers sat slumped against sandbags, their faces worn, their uniforms stained with sweat and blood. The battle had dragged on for days, and the outcome now seemed inevitable. In the command tent, General Marcus Holloway studied the map spread across the table before him. Red markers, representing enemy armor divisions, were closing in fast. His jaw tightened, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had seen too many wars. "It's over," he muttered, the words breaking the silence. "We can't stop them. If we stay, we'll be buried here." Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from, and if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. His officers lowered their heads. The order to retreat felt like surrender, and surrender meant the villages and cities behind them would fall to the enemy. Soldiers outside heard whispers, and the news spread quickly. Men shook their heads in disbelief. Some cursed, others sat quietly, gripping their rifles as though they had failed in their duty. Panic was simmering. Among the shadows of the base was a young woman, hardly noticed by most. Her name was Emily Carter. Officially, she was a mechanic assigned to the A-10 Thunderbolt II maintenance crew. To the others, she was simply the wrench girl, fixing engines and patching bullet holes in planes that few thought would fly again. She kept her head down, blending into the background of hardened Marines and pilots with call signs and battle scars. But Emily wasn't ordinary. Her brother, Daniel Carter, had been a Marine captain, killed in combat just months before. His death had left her hollow, but it also lit a fire inside her. Daniel had once told her, "If you ever get the chance to fight back, do it. Don't. Wait for someone else." Emily had also logged endless simulator hours in her free time, learning every system of the A-10 by heart. Though she lacked the official wings of a pilot, her mind and hands knew the Warthog better than anyone. The crisis deepened. Enemy tanks were pushing through the valley, their engines growling, their turrets lighting up the night with muzzle flashes. Drones overhead confirmed that artillery batteries were setting up just beyond the ridgeline. If they struck, the base would be wiped off the map. General Holloway slammed his fist onto the table. "We can't stop them," he repeated. The officers were silent. Doubt filled the room. Soldiers outside muttered that the end had come. Some remembered famous warriors, Audie Murphy, Dwight Eisenhower, men who had turned impossible odds into victory. But none of them were here now. Emily stood among the mechanics, trembling. Fear gripped her, the same fear she'd felt when she was told her brother's unit had been overrun. She remembered crying into her pillow, whispering that she should have been there. Now, in the middle of this hopeless night, the same despair clawed at her chest. But under it, a voice spoke, quiet, steady, defiant. She stepped forward. "I can fly the A-10. The words hit like a shockwave. Mechanics turned to her. Pilots scoffed. One officer barked a laugh. "You? You're not even cleared for the cockpit?" Another shook his head, muttering, "We need real pilots, not dreamers." But Emily's voice didn't shake. "I know the systems. I've studied every detail. I can fly it." She looked directly at the general. "Let me take it up. Just once. If I fail, we lose nothing more than we already have. If I succeed, we might just have a chance." The tent fell silent. General Holloway studied her face, young, determined, and burning with something he hadn't seen in his soldiers in days. Belief. After a long pause, he gave the faintest nod. "God help us all," he said. Emily's build-up began in the hangar. She climbed the ladder into the A-10 cockpit, the massive plane looming like a beast ready to be unleashed. The crew around her whispered nervously, exchanging doubtful glances. But as she strapped in, her hands moved with precision, flipping switches, running through startup sequences. The cockpit glowed green, the HUD flickering alive, every detail magnified. The low rumble of the engines starting, the vibration in the ground as the turbines whined to life, the metallic clank as she pulled the canopy shut. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her breathing slowed. She whispered to herself, "Daniel, watch me!" Time stretched. Outside, soldiers gathered, their eyes fixed on the hangar. The general stood with his arms crossed, a war between hope and despair raging in his heart. The impossible moment had arrived. Emily throttled forward, and the Warthog lumbered down the runway. With a sudden roar, the plane lifted into the night sky. Gasps rose from the ground. Against all doubt, the mechanic was airborne. Below, the battlefield sprawled in fire and chaos. Tanks rolled through the valley, artillery readied to strike, infantry advancing in dark waves. Emily's hands gripped the controls. She lined up the crosshairs, the GAU-8 Avenger cannon spinning to life. Then, she dove. The Warthog screamed. Through the sky, the cannon thundering. Streams of depleted uranium shells ripped into the tanks, shredding steel like paper. Explosions lit the valley as enemy columns collapsed under her assault. She banked low, skimming just feet above the ground, dodging anti-aircraft fire. Missiles streaked past her wings, but she rolled, pulled up, and struck again. For a moment, silence clung to the camp. No one dared breathe. Then the battlefield erupted in chaos, enemy forces scattering under the relentless rain of fire. The outcome was undeniable. Emily had done it. She had shattered the enemy advance. The base erupted in cheers. Soldiers shouted, some crying, others laughing in sheer disbelief. "She's insane!" one Marine yelled, grinning. "She just saved us all!" Pilots shook their heads, speechless. General Holloway stood rooted, his mouth dry. "She just turned the tide," he whispered. Hours later, when Emily brought the A-10 back down, the plane was scarred, wings battered, smoke trailing from the engines. She climbed down from the cockpit, her face pale but her eyes steady. Soldiers rushed to meet her, clapping her on the back, shouting her name. But Emily shook her head. "Someone had to," she said quietly. There was no arrogance, no boast. Just quiet determination. Her story would spread, not as propaganda, not as a tale of official heroism, but as the whispered legend of the mechanic who became a pilot when all hope was lost. She became known in camps as the girl who flew into war, the night, and returned with victory in her hands. The lesson was clear. Courage isn't always about rank or medals or training. It's about the choice to step forward when everyone else steps back. Emily Carter proved that night that ordinary people carry extraordinary strength within them, waiting for the moment to rise. And so, when the history of that battle was told, generals and strategists spoke of tactics and logistics. But the soldiers, the men who fought and survived, told another story. They told of the unknown pilot who dared to fly when even the commander said it was over. Because in the darkest, our courage rose on wings of steel. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the Eastern European valley. Dust and smoke mingled in the air, giving the battlefield a surreal, almost dreamlike quality. Soldiers shuffled through the trenches, checking weapons, patching gear, and stealing glances at the horizon where enemy tanks and armored vehicles were already advancing. NATO forces, a combined effort of American and British soldiers, were stretched thin, exhausted from days of relentless fighting. Among them moved a young woman named Sarah Whitman. To most, she was simply another aide, a logistic officer handling communications and supplies, blending seamlessly into the hum of the camp. She carried herself with quiet efficiency, her uniform neat, her hands steady as she relayed messages and ensured that troops received rations and ammunition. She appeared ordinary, almost invisible amid the chaos of war, just another cog in a vast machine of strategy and survival. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. Yet Sarah held a secret no one in the camp suspected. She was the daughter of Colonel James Whitman, a decorated U.S. Air Force veteran who had once flown alongside legends like Robin Olds and Chuck Yeager. From a young age, she had been trained to understand aircraft and tactics, learning the intricate systems of fighter planes almost by instinct. But life had taken her down a different path, one that led her to logistics rather than the cockpit. Until now. The crisis came without warning. Enemy forces, a mechanized division equipped with advanced tanks and artillery, had breached the northern flank. NATO lines began to crumble under the relentless assault. Soldiers shouted orders, rifles fired, and the ground trembled beneath advancing armor. The general, a battle-hardened American officer, muttered grimly to himself, "It's over." The troops, exhausted and demoralized, began retreating in scattered panic. If the line failed, entire towns would be overrun, civilians trapped in the crossfire, and the war effort set back immeasurably. Even seasoned warriors felt despair. Soldiers remembered names like Navy SEAL Michael Murphy and WWI hero Henry Johnson, men who had faced impossible odds and triumphed. Yet even their stories felt distant, irrelevant in the face of the overwhelming enemy. Sarah watched the chaos, her heart pounding. She recalled her father's words from childhood. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's what you do despite it. Her fear twisted in her stomach, a reminder of past losses, the lives already claimed by war. Then, amid the confusion, she stepped forward. Her voice, calm but firm, carried over the din. "I can fly the A-10. Heads turned in disbelief. Soldiers paused mid-step. Pilots laughed nervously. "You!" one exclaimed. "You're not even assigned to combat missions." Another muttered under his breath, shaking his head. But Sarah met their gaze without flinching. "I know this plane. I've studied it for years. I've trained every day. Let me take it into the sky. If I fail, we lose nothing more than we already have. If I succeed, we gain a fighting chance." The general's eyes narrowed, torn between protocol and desperation. Finally, he nodded, the faintest trace of hope in his voice. "God help us all." The preparation began slowly, deliberately. Sarah approached the A-10 Thunderbolt II parked at the edge of the runway, its massive wings casting a shadow over the sand and gravel. The mechanics around her murmured nervously, exchanging glances that spoke of doubt. She climbed into the cockpit, her father's dog tags resting against her chest, a talisman of courage and legacy. Every action was precise. She flipped switches, ran pre-flight checks, and adjusted the HUD until the glow of the display lit her face. The engines rumbled to life, vibrations coursing through the plane and into her body. She breathed slowly, the desert wind whipping around the hangar, carrying with it the scent of fuel, gunpowder, and anticipation. Time seemed to stretch as every second became a test of nerves. The A-10 began to taxi forward, the ground trembling beneath its weight. Sarah's hands were steady on the throttle, eyes fixed on the horizon where enemy armor awaited. The Warthog lifted into the sky, powerful and roaring, defying expectation as a mechanic-turned pilot soared into battle. Soldiers on the ground craned their necks in disbelief. Could this one woman really turn the tide? Below, the enemy's advance was relentless. Tanks rolled over the terrain, artillery flashed in bursts, and infantry moved like dark shadows, closing in on NATO positions. Sarah's heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus. She remembered every lesson from her father, every hour of simulator training. Her fear transformed into clarity. She was not just fighting for herself, but for everyone relying on the line to hold. Then, she struck. The gay U-8 Avenger cannon spun to life, screaming through the air as she unleashed a storm of fire and steel. Tanks erupted in explosions, enemy lines fractured, and the sky itself seemed to shake with the roar of her attack. She banked low, skimming over hills and trenches, evading missile fire with skill that came from instinct as much as training. Each pass destroyed key positions, crippling the enemy's momentum. Silence hung briefly after her first strike, a fragile moment of tension before the ground below erupted in chaos. Soldiers cheered, shouted, and even cried in disbelief at what they were witnessing. She had taken what seemed impossible and made it real. The general, watching from his command tent, removed his cap and whispered, "She's the miracle we needed." Hours later, Sarah returned to base, the A-10 battered but triumphant. She climbed down from the cockpit, her face streaked with sweat and soot, her hands trembling but steady. Soldiers rushed to her side, celebrating, but she shook her head. "I just did what had to be done," she said quietly. Her humility was as profound as her bravery. Her story spread quickly through the ranks, not because of official commendations, but because it inspired every soldier who heard it. She reminded them that courage often comes from unexpected places and that even ordinary people can perform extraordinary deeds when necessity demands. The lesson was clear. True bravery is not about rank or recognition. It is about action in the face of fear. Sarah Whitman, the daughter of a legendary pilot, had stepped beyond the shadows of expectation to become a symbol of hope, proving that the limits of possibility are defined only by the courage to act. In the aftermath, soldiers whispered her name in reverence. The Thunderbolt's daughter! She had taken flight when all seemed lost, turning despair into victory. Even the general admitted quietly that her audacity had changed the course of the battle. And though she returned to her ordinary role the next day, the memory of her courage lingered, a spark lighting the hearts of all who fought alongside her. In the darkest hour, she had shown that one person, guided by skill, determination, and belief in herself, could rewrite what seemed impossible. Because in war, sometimes the difference between defeat and victory is the courage to rise when everyone else has given up, and Sarah Whitman had risen.